a quick, short recap on the western flank of the southern mound. This is where a lot of the current archaeology is going on, and I'll just walk you through it in a minute. But basically, orientation, celestials, solar solstice sunset, solar solstice sunrise, equinox sunrise, setting due west twice a year, and then the winter solstice sunrise and winter solstice sunset. A little off of the tree line here, but over there, Camel's Hump, right behind that birch tree. So we'll open those up a bit, but basically what you can see here, big, massive stoneworks, all the quartz inclusions that one would expect, and basically you can see this is probably stonework from what was in here, farming, my clearing of it, place boulders along the side. So I think there's a lot of top level surface markings from subsequent waves of archaeoastronomers, maybe even Knights Templar. I'm not going to rule that out. I think the 1700s site on the other side of the quarry, in that direction, where we're finding plate glass and pottery from that era, might sort of speak to that sort of, and then earlier. Going back to the Vikings, Druids, pagans of the Nordic passage in the 800-900 period, and they find it maybe around 800 restored, but probably done previous to that. If I had to posit a guess, you would have had, and of course all through this, I think native indigenous cultures to come post-glaciers would have been in and out and checking places. And so I'm not trying to create a definitive timeline, but I do believe what we can see evidenced as far as the archaeoastronomy and its relationships to points all throughout, not just Europe and places like Ireland and Scotland, but also the relevance of pyramids and Egypt, and understanding this large atlas was all there. So in any event, prior to that, I think the Bronze Age was here, when the oceans were up to the edge of that meadow, and maybe even up to here, where the pond level is, could have been ocean at one point, based on topography of what some say Lake Winooski would have been at its highest apex. So basically we've got this parabola, which reflects the solar solstice rise of the winter, and it comes down through all that documented stonework. I'm working on that section up there as time allows, and that comes under this slab here, and there's just a bunch of pieces that are sitting under this red maple. How contiguous it is, I don't know. And then there's these top level pieces up here and here and there. There's a couple pieces buried under there, but all of these are glacial erratic, large boulder sized, significant pieces. However, actually I don't think it's so much erratics. I think it's more because they were quarried across the street and brought here, and the glacial erratic that exists, I think, is the one that would be at the northernmost point on the northern mound, just off of our property on the adjacent property. I think that's a glacial erratic. Maybe it got carved too, I don't know. But there's just a large amount of basalt. Some that may have been in the bed base here, but I think a large amount would have been quarried and set up here intentionally, as an effigy, but more as an observatory. And I think later subsequent native and latter waves of archaeoastronomers in this area would have settled here and tried to do whatever they could to calibrate it, maybe to honor it, and to sort of speak to ancestors and ancients to protect it, not knowing what it was doing. And where it might have been pointing to Draco as the North Star. Polaris, comes in around 900, 1000 as the North Star, and Thuban is out. So basically in that transition, there may have been lost understanding in this technology and these knowledge base and how we orient. But I do believe that for all of this to exist, an ancient understanding of not just magnetic north to south and the precession of the equinox or the axial rotation, as it were, with wobbles and obliquities calculated into that 41,000 year cycle. But yeah, I think they would have had to have known significant levels of information and data that we currently don't in history ascribe to those cultures. And waves of past understanding, I think we just kind of credit it to our own interpretation of who learned it when, and that stuck. I don't think that's really necessarily what the forensics is suggesting really happened, but this is kind of exciting to be part of understanding how this database and all this, I should say, science, all this library of knowledge is literally encapsulated in the stoneworks here. It's not hard to, actually look at it and then see the parallels to other sites that are just made of earth out in the Midwest, Ardena culture, but also because there wouldn't be a large amount of stonework to use out there. So it is mostly soils from the glacial erosion pounding at the volcano, this ancient volcano in the northeast that would have been, 15,000, 17,000 feet tall potentially, and or just massively moving towards the north and has an oceanic rift down to the south. And you just would have had this thing that we know created the Appalachians much taller, and that would have been because we know how the earth spins and how axial precession moves with respect to a sun at apex at the solar solstice over millennia, carving an auger bit, if you will, into the northern hemisphere glaciers, creating a corkscrew water slide that effectively would just keep pushing water, from all across Europe. And then if we're looking at the east, right, it would have gone all the way across. That's how we know Doggerland is washed out. It would have gone to blown out all of the UK. And then for 2,000 years between meltwater pulse 1A and 2B, meltwater pulse 2B, you would have had 2,000 years of water just exiting into the Atlantic without people really knowing how those flooding events were impacting them, mostly because you would have had a larger part of the west coast of the Americas washed out already from the beginning of that cycle of axial precession flooding, in my theory. And then you would have seen a mass amount deposited into the Pacific, expanding on a large amount that would have come from the melt off of the Antarctica glacier previously. And so thusly, I posit we would have seen something whereby the meltwater would have been pushing all the way through 2,000 years, and then eventually it would have hit into the Americas. And so as it's hitting the Americas, it basically is in a position now where it's going to wash out the entire Midwest because it's corkscrewing. And we know this to be true because that glacial lake is whoa, kind of teetering backwards here as I'm looking to grab these rocks. But we know that glacial lake that ended up depositing into the Atlantic because of all of the glacial erratics that mark a due southerly precession through the New England Northeast, if you will, and perfectly in line with a theory that the glaciers were carved so that the water would drop into the Atlantic instead of washing out the Midwest. And it adds up with science because, well, we know what the geology has done and we could look at the water levels and rise. However, this is getting towards the southern end, the northern end of the southern mound, And you can just see all the rocks are connecting out this way. It's a big, really large corridor. This is one large stone. Again, this whole edge is just, you can see where I was standing previously. And it's over here. I was going to make a little play for it with the kids out here, but we got past that. We ended up at a climbing gym for a bit. So the tire tread thing here wasn't necessary, but that was fun. And those guys are all grown up now, so we get to kind of reinterpret the space and look at it and say, well, what was really going on here before? And it's much bigger than a kid's treehouse. However, I think there would have been some significant water engineering pools in between these stoneworks, things that would have been facilitating. Again, this is a large slab right here. Things that would have facilitated looking up at stars at night, reflecting them back down into the body of that water. So, yeah, we're just down there. This whole corridor here is just large stoneworks following that parabola. And that goes all the way up there beyond this pile of rubbish. More stones here that got pulled out. And then these here were all sort of in a circle holding this kind of a terrace up. So I'm not exactly sure how that relates. But the thing is, once you get into this kind of a very earthen mound system, you could dig through these soils and almost expose past this, the duff and that topsoil layer. And then, you start getting into clays and engineered soils, in my humble opinion, with very highly precise symmetry of stonework. So you might see like a repetitive pattern, especially where there's like a hot site, where, for instance, there might be just like some kind of significant thing, like, oh, this is a astronomy station, so there might be all kinds of like diamond-shaped rock carvings in jasper and quartz and granite and citrine, and they all kind of match. And sort of like a chest-size piece, a mid-size piece, a larger size piece, and then like a very large piece. So that's kind of like a tell. A lot of these kinds of things where you'd see nickel or copper inlays, or nickeline, or in some cases silver. Yesterday I just found a piece. There's just, this would be like two rocks side by side that have these kind of pitched angles. Trace it back, there's like this little crick on the other side of this massive stone house. The sugar house restoration. We've got these two stones right there that have always been there. And whoops, those two right there. And they kind of funneled water coming off of there right through that. And this kind of ancient culvert. Now, I say ancient, it could be like 1950s. But then again, based on everything I'm seeing, it's more than likely it goes way deeper than that. However, this is the equinox component of the effigy mound. And this is where the equinox, I think, would have been rising to the east and setting to the west for this particular cartographic center. And yeah, and then we're back up on the top of the southern mound. So that's just kind of a quick fly around. There's also this whole other side right here. So it kind of creates the eastern side of that mound system, and then that brings us back down there. So posit being stoneworks follows parabola, waterworks equally follows the parabola, and yeah, it happens on both the northern mound and the southern mound. So that's a lot to pack in for one day. Hope everyone's well. Peace.